Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And welcome to our latest virtual field trip. Today we're going to have some fun looking at the last 50 years of collecting baseball cards, running the gamut from 1970 all the way up until 2020. Now that doesn't mean we're going to show cards from every year. We wouldn't really have time to do that and give them justice. But we are going to pick some of my favorite cards and some of the cards that I feel are historically significant, unusual, intriguing, maybe visually stunning in some way. So we'll have some fun looking at some of these very interesting cards over the next hour. We will take your questions a bit later on as well. We can actually do that through our Zoom group chat function. So if you go to the chat, you can actually type in the question that you might have for me. We'll do that probably about 45 or 50 minutes into the program. Now, you might be wondering why we're doing this program today. And I guess the reasoning is this: our last two permanent exhibits here at the Hall of Fame that we have debuted are Whole New Ball Game, which is a terrific exhibit on the second floor. And it looks back at baseball history over the last 50 years, from 1970 to the current day. And then last year, Memorial Day 2019, we debuted Shoebox Treasures, which is a really fun and in-depth examination of baseball cards and baseball card collecting. So in a sense, we're kind of combining the two themes of those two exhibits, and we're taking a look at the last 50 years of baseball card collecting. So we'll have some fun with that over the course of the next hour. So we'll begin with the year 1970. Not sure how many of you were alive at that point. It's hard to believe. 1970 was 50 years ago. Now, I have to mention, I didn't actually actively begin collecting until 1972. I was 7 at that point. I wasn't collecting in 1970 because I was only 5. However, when I did get older, I retroactively started collecting cards from the 1970 and 71 sets because I wanted to have complete sets for the entire decade of the 1970s. So that's kind of why we're beginning with this set. One of the reasons I like this set, 1970 Topps, is in part because of the offbeat gray border that you see on the cards. Topps, for the most part, had used the basic white borders on their baseball cards. They decided to change that up a little bit in 1970, and they gave us this gray look, which I think is actually kind of cool. The name of the player they put in almost a script font, which is a little bit unusual, toward the lower left-hand corner of the card. Two of my favorite cards from the 1970 Topps set are shown here. And one thing I should point out, I'm not really highlighting cards based on monetary value, based on cards that are going to bring you a lot of compensation in return if you decide to sell them. That's not why we're selecting these cards. We're really trying to pick cards that are historically significant, cards that are artistic in some way, unusual, visually striking, that sort of thing. So let's begin with the card on the left, George Scott. He was actually one of my favorite players growing up in the 1970s. It's kind of an unusual photograph of George Scott because, we see him, he's standing right in front of the camera, but then they have him looking to the right or to his left. So he's not looking at the cameraman. He's almost purposefully looking away from the cameraman. You might notice, though, he's got a big smile, looks like he's laughing. And that was really kind of appropriate for George Scott. He was a jovial, outgoing personality, and he was a guy who was really well-liked by his teammates throughout his career. One of the other interesting things about this card is that it shows him wearing a cap. And the George Scott that I remember from watching on TV in the 1970s, he almost always wore a helmet. He wore a helmet at the plate, obviously. But he also wore a helmet when he played first base. So this is a very unusual shot from earlier in his career when he was actually wearing a cap. And it looks like he's getting ready to take part in batting practice. So that's why he's wearing the cap and not the helmet at that point. Now on the right side of this slide, we have another card for a player named Jose LeBoy, but fans of a certain age will remember him much better as Coco LeBoy. It's one of the great names in baseball history. Excuse me. It's a photograph that was taken during the Montreal Expo's first spring training camp. We believe this photograph was taken the previous spring, 1969, when the Expos gathered in West Palm Beach, Florida, I believe, for their first spring training. They were an expansion team, and they had just joined the National League at that point in time. And I just love the photograph because LeBoy is, really giving some serious thought, it appears, to which bat he's going to use in pregame batting practice. He's got a bat rack in front of him, probably about 9 or 10 bats, and he's really studying it. I don't know if he's actually doing that authentically or if he was just told to do that by the cameraman, but it's kind of a cool shot. It's also got the inclusion of the Topps All-Star Rookie award or trophy that they used to give away. They still have an All-Star Rookie trophy, but it looks much different now. And whenever they showed the trophy on the baseball cards, they always showed an animated version that was kind of in yellow, kind of an unusual look. So I think that's another very cool aspect to this card from 1970. Now here we have 1971, and this is really an historically significant set in the history of Topps baseball. Topps really started to become daring here. They had used the gray bordered cards in 1970. Now they go with the black bordered cards. And it's the first time they ever had done that since they started making baseball cards in the early 1950s, since Topps started doing that. Now the black border cards are very distinctive, but collectors of these cards know how difficult it is to find them in mint condition, because any kind of a nick or a chip or a crease on the edge of the card is going to show up on the black border. So that's the downside. But if you can find these cards in pretty good condition, they are visually, I think, very, very appealing. This is also another significant Topps set because this is where Topps introduced full color action photos of players for the first time. They put 52 of these cards in the 1971 Topps set, and we've included 2 of them. They happen to be the New York catchers, the Mets starting catcher Jerry Grote, and the Yankees starting catcher, the late Thurman Munson. And I think they're really 2 outstanding action photographs. The Grote card, he is has just hit the ball. We don't know exactly where. It could be a pop-up, could be a ground ball, could be hit to the outfield. But his head is down, and he's churning the arms, churning the legs, and he's running full out. He's giving you a full effort. And that's kind of the player that Jerry Grote was. He played all out all the time. So I think it's a great shot of Grote. The Munson card is very popular with collectors. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's the first card where Thurman Munson has the card to himself. In 1970, Topps had come out with a card for Yankee rookies, but Munson had to share that card with another player named Dave McDonald. So this is the first time that he appears solo on the card. Once again, we have that yellow Topps All-Rookie or All-Star Rookie trophy. And it's a great action shot. And it's actually one that researchers have been able to pin down to a game that took place in 1970 between the Yankees and the Oakland A's. Munson is attempting to put a tag on Oakland A's pitcher Chuck Dobson. And if you look and find the box score from the game, it will reveal to you that Dobson was actually safe. But it's a wonderful shot. It's a great action shot. Catcher trying to apply a tag. The cloud of dirt and dust is in midair. It's really an iconic photograph of Thurman Munson, probably the most memorable card that was ever produced for the outstanding Yankee catcher. So here are 2 of the 52 action shots. And this was really a big deal to baseball card collectors because prior to 1971, all photographs of players, their regular issue cards, were essentially posed photos, portrait shots. You never saw any full color action shots. Sometimes you would get action cards for the World Series cards, but they were always in black and white or they were colorized. These are legitimate full-color action photographs, and this was the year 1971 that Topps introduced that, and it really would start to change baseball card collecting. Now that brings us to 1972, and this was when I was 7, and this was the year that I first started actively purchasing and trading for baseball cards. Now, why 1972 Topps Dave Cash? Well, this was the first card that I ever acquired. I purchased it on a Saturday afternoon at Gallard's Stationery Store in Bronxville, New York. I think that store is still there all these years later. And the reason I call this my first card is because it was the card at the top of the pack. There really were a bunch of other cards, but this was the first card. And this was the one that I really kind of remember. I liked the Pirates of this era. People that know me know that I'm a big Clemente fan. The Pirates were coming off a world championship. So this was pretty cool to have as my first card. Now, little did I know at the time that Dave Cash would actually provide 2 interesting connections to me in the future. Although I had no idea at the time this was going to happen. Dave Cash was from Utica, New York. And Utica, New York was actually where I had my first job. I started at a radio station in Utica, New York back in 1987 when I graduated from college. So it's just kind of an interesting coincidence. I didn't take the job because of the Dave Cash connection. In fact, I didn't find out until later that Cash was from Utica. But after I started working there, I realized this interesting connection. The other thing I learned about Cash is that he had once played in the Hall of Fame game in Cooperstown. It was back in 1973 when the Pirates were one of the 2 teams. And of course, that was the year that the late Roberto Clemente was inducted. And of course, Cooperstown, New York, well, that's where I took my second job. When I left the radio station, I came to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So just 2 interesting coincidences there. As an added bonus, when I worked in radio a number of years ago, I did have the chance to interview Dave Cash on the talk show that I did. So that was a special thrill. He's a great guy. Still around. He's retired now. He was a longtime minor league manager and coach, coached a little bit at the major league level, but is now retired from baseball. But he was the first baseball card that I actually put some money down and purchased, which is kind of interesting. Now, sticking with the 1972 Topps set, that was another interesting, it was set that was interesting in another reason, for another reason. It's because it starts to show indications of players and their changing grooming habits. If you had followed baseball back in the 1960s, you probably remember that baseball is a very conservative sport at that time. No players wore beards or mustaches. That was kind of an unwritten rule. You just didn't do that. You didn't have facial hair. And players did not have long hair either. Almost all players wore their hair very short, close cropped. A lot of players had the military crew cut. That was very much in style for baseball in the 1960s. Well, that starts to change in the 1970s. Now, the Oakland A's were one of the leading rebellious players in this change. You might remember the Mustache Gang of 1972. Reggie Jackson shows up to spring training with a mustache. That was unheard of. It eventually leads to Charlie Finley, the owner of the team, basically telling every player, if you grow a mustache by Father's Day, you'll get a $300 bonus. $300 was big money to players back in the early 70s, in the years before free agency. So all the players on the A's ended up sporting mustaches. Now, Mudcat Grant was not on the A's in 1972. He actually was released after the 1971 season. But Topps put out a card for him nonetheless. It was his final card as a major leaguer. And you'll notice that he's wearing the mutton chop sideburns, which really became his trademark in the latter years of his career. This would have been unheard of in the 1960s for a player to look like this. But baseball fashions, baseball grooming was changing in the early 70s, and this card is a perfect example of that. By the way, we're going to be doing a program coming up in October where we take an in-depth look at the life and career of Mudcat Grant, who not only was a very fine pitcher, but has also been a colorful character and really an unofficial baseball ambassador. So that's an upcoming program where we'll talk about Mudcat. One more card from well, actually, I've got a couple more cards from 1972. This is a really fun one. Billy Cowan was a journeyman outfielder. He was a backup for most of his career, but card collectors that remember this era, early 70s, have probably seen this card. Maybe they've sent it to Billy Cowan to have it autographed. He gets this card in the mail all the time. It's a wonderful shot. You can see Billy Cowan. His head is perfectly posed within the old halo that used to be located just beyond the outfield fence at Anaheim Stadium. Now, they still have the halo. I think it's out in the parking lot now, but it was in a different place back in the early 70s. And I don't know if this was Cowan's idea or if it was the photographer's idea. Maybe they both agreed on it. Whatever the case, it ended up being a wonderful shot. The halo is perfectly circling around Cowan's head. This is just a common card for a journeyman player, but it's a very memorable card simply because of the halo. One of the things that Topps did in 1972, in addition to creating a very large set that had almost 800 cards, that was the biggest set to date, and also using a lot of very colorful imagery, colorful designs, another innovative thing that Topps did, for the first time in its history, Topps introduced traded cards. They did only a handful of these. I believe there were 7 in total. This is one of the more prominent ones because it features a Hall of Famer. And it's the only Topps card that shows Frank Robinson wearing the colors of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was traded by Baltimore to Los Angeles after the 1971 World Series. He would play only one season for the Dodgers, 1972. He played for Walter Alston, Hall of Fame manager, and then ended up being traded after that 1 year to the California Angels. So this is kind of a rare image. You don't see a lot of photos of Frank Robinson wearing the Dodger blue, and this is a road uniform. And Topps, what they basically did here, they used a similar design to what they used with their other cards. You can see the bright frame that is used, similar to the Cowan card. But instead of putting the team name at the top of the card, they put a traded stamp across the photograph, and then they have the player's name at the bottom of the card. And these cards came out much later in 1972. This was their first case of traded or updated cards. They wanted to show some of the significant players who had changed uniforms, either during the winter or in some cases, players who had actually been traded during spring training. And there were a few Hall of Famers that were included on these traded cards. Frank Robinson one, Joe Morgan was another, and Steve Carlton was a third. So there were not a lot of traded cards, just a handful in 1972, but 3 Hall of Famers represented in that small group. Another card from 1972, Topps, Willie Mays, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest players in the history of the game. And this we see is an in-action card. Now, we mentioned a moment ago that in 1971, Topps began the trend of action cards. They decided, because fans loved them, the kids especially went crazy over the action cards. I was one of them. So in 1972, Topps, they made 72 of these action cards. And that was an increase of 20 over the debut action cards of 1971. The cards were so popular, these action shots, that Topps chose to highlight each of these action cards in 1972 with a red frame and with the words "in action" in bold lettering near the top of the card. It's one of my favorite cards. What better way to see the great Willie Mays, who was a fantastic base runner, what better way to see him than running the bases, sliding into home plate during a game at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Let's now jump ahead to 1973, another one of the all-time great players, Roberto Clemente. This was the final regular issue card that Topps put out for Clemente. Now, as you probably know, he had sadly already died in that New Year's Eve 1972 plane crash. Topps, though, at that point had already produced its 1973 card for Clemente. Now, those cards were not going to come out until February of 73, but the card was already made. And Topps kind of debated, what do we do? We have this great player who's passed away. His life, his career, sadly, are over. Do we put out a card for him as a tribute, or is the more respectful thing to take the card out of production and not issue it? Well, I think they did the right thing. They ended up producing the card, and I think it's a fitting tribute. I think of all the cards that came out for Clemente, this is the most visually aesthetic, attractive. It's an action shot. It's a spring training game between the Pirates and the Mets, probably taken during spring training in 1972. That's Jerry Grody, by the way, is the Mets catcher. You can see the umpire as well. And Clemente is at the plate. This would have been at the Mets spring training facility in 1972. So this was not at Chase Stadium. This was a spring training shot that was taken here. And I do think it's a fitting tribute for the great player who tragically lost his life at the age of 38. And it's one of my most cherished cards to this day. Well, another all-time great here. We've got some heavy hitters. Hank Aaron, 1974 Topps. And this is card number 1. Of course, every card that Topps puts out has a number on the back of the card. So this was number 1 in the 74 set. But it is so different in terms of design and layout from the other cards in the set. So it really stands out. The reason the Topps did this, they issued this card with the crown, with Hank Aaron in a special font, and the notation, new all-time home run king. They did that in anticipation of Henry Aaron hitting his 715th home run and breaking the long-standing career record of Babe Ruth. Now, technically, when this card came out, Aaron was not yet the home run king. He had 713 home runs. So he was 1 short of Ruth, and he was 2 away from breaking the record. The Topps figured it's a pretty good bet he's going to tie the record, then break it. Sure enough, he did. And the history-making moment came on April 8th, 1974, when Aaron homered against Al Downing of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Another interesting thing Topps did in 74, they issued 6 Hank Aaron special cards. Each of the Hank Aaron specials contained 4 small images of previous Aaron cards. So if you were a fan of Hank Aaron, and who wasn't back in 1974, there were 7 different Hank Aaron cards to collect just in the Topps set. Well, here's a second Frank Robinson card. This is from the 1975 Topps set. 75 Topps is known as one of the most colorful sets ever produced. For the first time, Topps issued a set with each card featuring a multicolored border. We saw white in the past, we saw gray, we saw the black border cards. Now we see multicolored. They used all sorts of combinations. This has become one of Topps' most popular sets with collectors, but like the 71 set, very difficult to keep in pristine condition because of the colored borders. They tend to show any kind of nick, any kind of imperfection. Now, here we have Frank Robinson, and the card shows him with the Cleveland Indians. It shows his position in the lower right-hand corner as designated hitter, but it actually makes no mention of his other, far more historically significant title in 1975, and that, of course, was as the manager. He was the first black manager in the history of Major League Baseball, but there's no mention of that, either on the front or back of this card. Now, Topps did put out an Indians team card, and they did that for all the teams in 1974, and in one of the corners, there's a very small photograph of the team's manager. So you will find a Frank Robinson manager card, but it's not on this one. This is the regular issue card, and Topps thought, well, this is the player card, so we're just going to put designated hitter, and we'll leave the manager designation for the team cards. Well, here's a fun one. This always kind of brings a chuckle to baseball fans. In 1976, Topps included 44 traded cards. And much like the 1972 traded cards, they came out later in the season, showing players who had been traded from one team to another during the winter. Of the 44, I think it's safe to say this is the most memorable. It's the Oscar Gamble card. and it shows the incredible afro that he sported. Some have called it the largest afro in the history of baseball. I guess Coco Crisp a few years ago came pretty close, challenged Oscar Gamble for the title when he was playing with the Oakland A's. Of course, it's very interesting that Oscar actually had to cut his hair when he was traded. He was traded by to the Yankees in spring training. He comes over in a deal, and he typically in recent years had sported the large hair. But the Yankees had very strict grooming rules at the time. They still do to this day. They've never allowed long hair. So Oscar had to have a special haircut arranged by our friend Marty Appel, who used to be the public relations director for the Yankees. And that allowed Oscar to comply with the Yankees grooming rules of that time period. We're going to jump ahead a little bit to the early 1980s. This is a set I really like, 1983 Topps. Donruss and Fleer had ended the Topps monopoly in 1983. And with competition now being created, Topps felt pressure to improve its product. And I think we really can see that reflected in the 1983 set. Each of the player cards features 2 photographs on the front. So you'd have a card, or rather a photograph, in either the lower left or lower right-hand corner. And then you would have a larger photograph, often an action photograph, occupying the top 3/4 of the card. And with this set, we saw better photography, a lot more action shots, the multiple photos on each card. So this really was one of the stronger sets that Topps had issued for a long time. This, I think, is one of the more intriguing cards from that set. It is supposed to be Reggie Smith's card. He was a first baseman for the San Francisco Giants, but it also includes another pretty good player named Ryne Sandberg, Hall of Fame second baseman. And this was a photograph that was taken at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Sandberg is being held on by Smith at first base, and the pitcher is attempting a pickoff, Sandberg making his way back to the bag. Sandberg, by the way, when this photograph was taken, 1982, that was his rookie year with the Chicago Cubs. So this is a very young Ryne Sandberg and a much older Reggie Smith, who was toward the end of his major league tenure. So it's kind of cool when one card gives you 2 really prominent players, including a Hall of Famer. 1985 Topps. This is historically significant because this was really the first time where Topps presented cards of amateur players who had not yet started their professional careers. These were player cards for the 1984 Olympic baseball team. And you may have seen some of these cards. Odemy McDowell is one of the other prominent players featured. But most famously, you have Mark McGwire. He's the best known player from that 1984 Olympic team, and he appears on this card. Now, Topps would not include McGwire in its 1985 set because he was still in the minor leagues at that point. They waited, they would not do that in 1986. They would wait until 1987 to show McGwire on his second card. And by then, McGwire is playing for the Oakland A's, first baseman, and doing some DHing as well. So there's a little bit of a gap in the McGwire collection. You start with 1985 when he's an amateur, he's still an Olympian, and then his first card showing him in a major league uniform with the Oakland A's is 1987 Topps. Well, this is another really comical card, one of my favorites. Always get a laugh when I see this one. I think it's one of the funniest cards in baseball history. It's a 1986 Fleer card of Mickey Hatcher. He was a utility player, played third base, played the outfield with the Minnesota Twins and some other teams as well back in the 1980s. And he is seen wearing a glove that is quite honestly larger than a frying pan. No, Hatcher did not wear this glove in an actual game. The rules would not permit that. Here's what happened during spring training in 1985. A glove company visited the Minnesota Twins camp in Orlando, Florida. Hatcher saw this glove, this promotional glove that was lying on the ground, and he decided, let's have some fun with it. So here's what he said. I picked it up, and the card guy just happened to shoot it when I was out there playing for fun. This is what Hatcher told ESPN.com. I said, get a picture of me with this glove because I need all the help I can get. Well, apparently the glove company loved the free publicity that Hatcher was giving them with the glove. So a representative for this company let Hatcher keep the oversized glove, hoping that the Twins utility man would bring it around to all of the American League sites. And that's exactly what Hatcher did. And he would do this for years to come. He would lug that glove around on Minnesota Twins road trips. The glove became a ready-made prop, something that he could unleash on teammates and fans during pregame workouts, the hours leading up to each game. Again, he didn't use it in a game itself. That would not be allowed. One time he pretended to do that. When he was going out to take his place in the field, he actually put this oversized glove on his left hand, started running out to the field, and then came back and got his regular glove. But it's just it's an hysterical photograph. The expression on Hatcher's face, the ridiculousness of that glove that is so much larger than it should be. I wonder if Mickey still has that glove all these years later. Here's a card that a lot of collectors will be familiar with, 1989 Upper Deck. This is the famed Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. Upper Deck was able to beat the other companies to the punch when it came to including the first card of this heralded rookie, Ken Griffey Jr. Now, in 1988, when this photograph was taken, Griffey had only played as high as AA ball. And a lot of people did not even expect him to play for the Mariners in 1989. Well, history would prove otherwise. It's an interesting photograph, aside from being a rookie card and a very valuable card. It's interesting in that Griffey is not wearing the Mariners uniform in this card. He is actually wearing the uniform of a minor league team, the San Bernardino Spirits. What Upper Deck did, they used a graphics machine to superimpose the Mariners S onto the cap. They also tinted the color of the cap to make it look like the Mariners color. So it's not airbrushing. It's more graphic design work, and it looks like an authentic Mariners cap, even though it is not. Now, this is the card that really created a new phenomenon within collecting, the whole idea of getting a player's rookie card. Rookie cards obviously had existed for many years, and they had had a certain value attached to them. But after this card came out, and after Griffey came up and started to take the American League by storm, fans became obsessed with trying to find the Upper Deck Griffey. This, of course, the first card on which he had ever appeared. And rookie cards have been this phenomenon, this sensation ever since. And the rookie card, in almost every situation, assuming the condition of the card is very, very good, that rookie card is almost always the most valuable card for a star player. And I've seen estimates for this card well over $150. Of course, again, depending on condition. So the Ken Griffey Upper Deck rookie, one of the more famous cards in baseball history. Here's a card that is decidedly less famous, but I think still interesting. Another company that entered the fray of putting out cards in the late 1980s and early 1990s was the Score Company. And they tended to use very colorful borders. Here they had the green border. This card has no particular monetary value like the Griffey card, but it is interesting to me because of the photograph. Look at the way that Lance McCullers' head is turned so awkwardly to the first base dugout while he's delivering the pitch. In fact, he just released the ball at this point, and instead of his head facing toward the catcher, toward home plate, his head is in the direction of the first base dugout. It's a very awkward delivery. And in retrospect, I guess this awkward delivery maybe explains why McCullers' career ended so quickly. He suffered arm problems, and he pitched his final major league game at the age of 28. When he was healthy, he was a very good relief pitcher. threw very hard, had good stuff, but his career came to an end short of his 30th birthday, and maybe, who knows, maybe because of the awkward pitching delivery. By the way, Lance is the father of Lance McCullers Jr., now a pitcher with the Houston Astros. Let's look at a 1991 card. This is from Topps, and it's Hall of Fame catcher Ivan Pudge Rodriguez. This is the rookie card for Ivan Rodriguez. Shows him with the Texas Rangers. It is a graded card. You'll notice that it is actually in a sleeve, and you can see the information about the card. 1991 Topps traded, 101T Ivan Rodriguez, and then you'll see the number on the far right, 10.0. Under that, the words Gem Mint. So this is a graded card. It has received the highest possible score. It's a basis of 0 to 10.0. 10.0 is the best, so this is considered Gem Mint. In terms of its condition, it is regarded as a perfect card. It is perfectly centered. The photographic image is clear. There is no blurring. There's no fading of the color. The centering of the card, it's perfectly centered. So all four borders are exactly the same in terms of their width. This is considered a perfect card, Gem Mint. And this is something that fans really started to become concerned with as the hobby moved into the 1990s. The whole idea was, if you're going to try to sell your cards down the line, some people looked at cards as an investment. Well, if you're going to sell your cards, what you want to do, you want to get your best cards graded, and you want them put in one of these slabs, although museum people will tell you these slabs are really not good for the card itself. That's how they're displayed when they're graded, but in terms of preservation, it's really not the best way. But as far as the condition when it was put into the slab, it was 10.0. It was Gem Mint. And if you were looking to sell this card down the line, the Gem Mint card, in theory, is going to produce the biggest monetary yield, if that's what you're looking to do. Of course, as a lot of baseball card collectors learned in the 1990s, their cards did not appreciate in value as much as they thought they would. A lot of that happened because there was an overproduction of cards in the late 80s, the early 90s. Cards kind of lost their rarity, their scarcity. It seems like everybody had baseball cards and everybody had star cards. Well, we know it's a supply and demand business, and if the supply exceeds the demand, brings the value, the price of the card down. But still interesting because it is considered a perfect card, 10.0 Gem Mint. Oh, here we have 1993 Topps Derek Jeter. It's one of two Jeter cards we're going to look at today. It is a rookie card. It is from 1993 Topps, and it does show Jeter. He has been taken as part of the 1992 amateur draft. Now, in 1992, Jeter would actually play in the South Atlantic League and the Gulf Coast League, two very low classifications in the Yankees minor league system. Even in 1993, when this card came out, Jeter was still playing minor league baseball. He would not appear on a Topps card in 1994 because he was still in the minor leagues. There was no expectation that he would play in the major leagues that year. And he would not make a return to Topps until 1995. And of course, 95, 96 is when Jeter first came up with the New York Yankees. 96 is really when he started to have an impact. But his first card that shows him wearing the regular Yankee uniform, not as a draft pick, but as more of a full-fledged Yankee, was part of the 1995 Topps set. Another card from 1993 Topps shows a veteran, the slugger Kevin Mitchell. It's an interesting card. It's unusual in that it shows Kevin Mitchell hitting fungos during pregame batting practice at the Kingdome in Seattle. It's very rare. I can't think of another card. Maybe there is one, but I can't think of another card offhand that shows a player participating in fungos, hitting fungos. Usually it's something coaches do. Now, it also appears that Mitchell is kind of calling a shot the way that he is extending his left arm toward the outfield. He has the ball in his left hand. In reality, he's probably just signaling to which outfielder he intends to hit the ball. Typically, that is what players and coaches do when they're hitting fungos. They try to indicate which outfielder they're going to hit the ball to. But it's just a very unusual pose. And to me, it's kind of weird that you see a shot of a player hitting fungos. That's not normally when we would associate the taking of photographs of baseball players. It doesn't usually happen during fungo practice, but it did with this Kevin Mitchell card. Here's another 1993 card, but this is from Fleer, and this one is kind of amusing. It's a left-hand pitcher named Greg Hibbard. He was a journeyman pitcher, and those journeys are exemplified here because 3 different teams are indicated on the front of the card. Now, if you look at his uniform that he is wearing, this looks to be a spring training photograph. He is wearing the Chicago White Sox colors. But if you look at the left side of the card, the border, the red border or orange border, and it says Greg Hibbard, Chicago Cubs. So that indicates, well, no, he's not with the White Sox. He's now with the Cubs. Then you look at the lower left-hand corner, and there's that diagonal blue strip, and it says traded from Marlins. So that's a 3rd team that's indicated on the front of the card. So who did Hibbard actually pitch for in 1993? Well, he was traded from the Marlins to the Cubs. So it was the Cubs. And he actually had arguably his greatest season. He won a career-high 15 games for the Cubs that year, did very, very well. He then pitched in 1994, and after that, he was out of baseball. It shows you how fleeting success can be in the game. Goes from a career-high 15 wins. A year later, he's out of the game, out of the major leagues. But kind of fun. 3 different teams featured on the Greg Hibbard card. 1998 Topps. I love this one. Brian Jordan. Topps showed some real creativity with its 1998 set. They didn't just take photographs at the ballpark, which was traditionally what Topps had done for many years, but they decided to do some of their work in a studio. So that blue sky background that you see there, that is actually a fake background. That is a blue sky backdrop. It might look like the sky, but it's not actually outdoors. That's an indoor studio shot. And the really interesting part, of course, is the football that makes its appearance on the card. And it's one of only a handful of times that we see footballs on baseball cards. There's a card of Nolan Ryan that shows him holding a football. He actually would sometimes throw footballs on the side as a way of kind of working out. Tom House was another guy who did that. He was also with the Texas Rangers. And I think he might have been the guy who started that whole idea that the pitching motion is actually very similar to the motion of a quarterback. And one of the ways that you could work out was actually by throwing a football. Not sure if anybody really follows that philosophy today, but certainly Nolan Ryan and Tom House did. Now, Brian Jordan was not a pitcher, but he was a legitimate 2-sport athlete. He played outfield for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was a very good outfielder. And he also played defensive back for the Arizona Cardinals football team in the National Football League. So Topps decided to have some fun with that. They had Jordan come into the studio. They put up the fake blue background. And what they did was they hung this football from a very thin rope or string, suspended it in midair, and they had Jordan pretend to take a swing at it. So very creative. If you have the 98 set, you'll see some of the cards are creative in this way. You can tell that they're actually indoor shots done in a studio rather than at the ballpark. Late 90s, early 2000s, we start to see card companies issuing premium or chase cards in packs of cards. And these premium cards became an incentive to purchase individual packs of cards. Even though there was no guarantee that the pack you were going to buy was going to have a premium card, but there was a chance. And if you could get the premium card, it always had a special value. One kind of premium card is shown here. It's a card that actually contains part of an artifact. This is a 2001 Topps Original. It includes a small patch of game-used fabric from Mike Schmidt's rookie uniform, his road uniform with the Philadelphia Phillies. So what they did was Topps took a Phillies uniform that Schmidt apparently wore back in the early 70s. It's from his rookie year. And they literally cut the uniform up into small pieces, and they put a circular patch on each of these limited edition premium or chase cards. Now, this is a very controversial maneuver if you look at it from the perspective of a museum, because a museum would never take an artifact. We're a baseball museum. We collect shoes, bats, caps, helmets, jerseys. We would never take a jersey from a player and cut it into small pieces and affix it to something else. But Topps is not a museum. They have a different motivation. And they're not the only company that's done this. Other companies have done this as well. So in this case, we have a game-worn fabric, a piece of polyester uniform, the road uniform that Schmidt used, and it was placed on X number of cards. I'm not sure exactly how many of these cards they put out, but it was probably a limited number because there's only so many pieces that you can cut a uniform into. But if you collected cards back in 2001, you might have gotten one of these in your regular pack of baseball cards. Another fun one, 2007 Topps Derek Jeter. So by this point, Jeter obviously is no longer a rookie. He is fully established as a great player. Seems pretty evident that he's going to make the Hall of Fame at some point. And of course, he was elected this past January. What's unusual, though, about this card is the presence of two figures that weren't actually at the ball game. So we have Jeter. He's taking a swing in a game. Looks like it's against the Boston Red Sox. The background that you see, the fans that you see, the dugout, that's all real. That was all there in the photograph. But there's two people included in the photograph that weren't actually there. One of them is the late Mickey Mantle. You can see him, the lower left-hand corner of the dugout. Topps took a photograph and, using Photoshop or what have you, they superimposed an image of Mickey to make it seem like he's in the dugout holding a bat. Then they took a living figure, President George Bush, the second George Bush, and they put him standing in what appears to be the second row at Yankee Stadium. Well, he was not there that day. Certainly would not have been standing in such a fashion. But again, using Photoshop or some other computer program, they're able to superimpose the figure of George Bush onto the Jeter card. So this was just something Topps decided to have some fun with. I don't know if there was necessarily a rhyme or reason to it, but Jeter was a big star. They decided to have some fun, show some creativity, and it produced this very memorable 2007 Topps card. Another memorable card, very unusual, 2012 Topps Skip Schumacher. Really more prominently, it shows the so-called rally squirrel. This may have been the first card where a live animal actually shows up more prominently than the actual player himself. It's the background on this. October 5th, 2011, the Cardinals are playing the Phillies, Game 4 of the National League Division Series. The Phillies lead the best of 5, 2-1. They're also leading the game by a run when Skip Schumacher steps into the batter's box against Roy Oswalt. Oswalt delivers a pitch, and as that pitch comes into Schumacher, the squirrel, a live squirrel, runs across the front of the batter's box area. This caused quite a commotion. The pitch was called a ball by the umpire. Oswalt and his manager, Charlie Manuel, argued it should have been called no pitch because of the squirrel, but Manuel lost the argument. Oswalt lost the argument. It was called a ball. Shortly thereafter, the Cardinals rallied to tie and then take the lead. They end up winning the game. Then they win Game 5 to take the series. Then they win the LCS and the World Series to complete the World Championship. So because of this way that they rallied to win that series and the two subsequent series, this was dubbed the Rally Squirrel. Topps decided to honor him with its 2012 Topps set. Another fun one, 2016 Topps Now. 2016 Topps introduced this whole idea of kind of immediacy cards. They call them Topps Now. And these are limited editions of cards celebrating great moments that are available for, I think, only about 24 hours. And then they're taken off the market. This is the card that celebrates the historic moment when Bartolo Colon hit his first major league home run, coming at the age of 42. He hit the home run on May 7, 2016 against James Shields of the Padres. For his career, Colon batted .084 in 299 at-bats, and this was his only home run. Certainly a great moment for Met fans and Bartolo Colon fans. Sticking with the Mets, here we have Lucas Duda. Well, not really. Over the years, a variety of card companies have made mistakes in issuing cards. The card will list one name on the front of the card, but the photograph shows a different player. This is not something that simply happened years ago. Even in today's age of fact-checking, computerization, and the seeming emphasis on being very precise, this kind of thing still happens. This was only 3 years ago. So we have a recent example, 2017 Topps. It is supposed to show Lucas Duda, first baseman for the Mets, but he is not the player on the card. No, the player is Eric Campbell, sometimes called Soup Campbell, who did play 21 games at first base for the Mets that season. And this is actually Campbell during that game getting ready to flip the ball to his pitcher, covering first base. As it turned out, this was Campbell's last season as a major league player, and I believe it was the last card for Topps on which he appeared. Another fun one from 2017, William Shatner. In the 2010s, Topps began to print a small subset of cards featuring celebrities who have thrown out ceremonial first pitches. In 2017, the group included 1980s icon Joan Jett, the actor John Goodman, Lou Ferrigno from The Incredible Hulk, among others. And they included the star from the original Star Trek, William Shatner. Of all the celebrities who actually threw out first pitches during the 2016 season, the most interesting to me is Shatner, in part because of his age. He's 85 at this point, and that's got to put him high on the list of the oldest people to ever throw out a ceremonial first pitch at a game. He's doing it at Fenway Park, and here he is accommodating the Red Sox by wearing their uniform. Finally, 2020, I wanted to include a card from this year's set. There's nothing particularly unusual about this card. It's part of the current set. Did come out as part of Topps opening day. I just like it because it's a visually striking card. We see longtime star Joey Votto eyeing a pitch during an at-bat at Great American Ballpark. It's a wonderful action photograph, vibrant colors, gives us a good look at Votto. He's actually wearing the Reds' throwback uniforms. I think that adds to the intrigue of it. And it's such a good photograph, we can actually see his face pretty clearly, the expression as he's giving this pitch an eyeful as it's coming in toward home plate. Just visually a striking card to me, and it kind of shows some of the advances that we have seen in terms of the quality of the photographing, clearer photographs, photographs that have much more definition, and really give us a much better sense of what the players look like today. So that is a rundown of the last 50 years of collecting baseball cards. We're going to get to your questions in a moment. I do want to remind you that we would love to have your support for our programs here at the Hall of Fame. We want you to consider becoming a member of our Hall of Fame's membership program. You'll receive a full roster of benefits, including unlimited admission to the museum for a full year. Also, 6 copies of our magazine, Memories and Dreams. To do so, all you have to do, visit baseballhall.org/join. There's various levels of membership. Whatever is workable for you, we'd certainly appreciate your support. All right, let's get to your questions now. We have Question from Mark Pellish. He wants to know about the 1973 Roberto Clemente Topps card. What was presented on the reverse side of the Clemente card? It's a good question, Mark. The card basically just showed Clemente's career statistics from 1955, when he was a rookie with the Pittsburgh Pirates, through his 1972, his final season. There's no mention of the plane crash, the accident that took his life. As I recall, there really isn't any biographical information. I think it's just his statistics pretty much fill up the back of the card. And that's pretty much it. Now, there have been times in the history of baseball card collecting where Topps and other companies have put out a card for a deceased player, and they might, put something like the words "in memoriam" on the front of the card, but they did nothing like that. There's no indication either on the front or the back of the card about the plane crash and the fact that Clemente had died during the off season. Jeff Kendrick has not a question but a comment. They do a better job of blurring the background of action shots today than 50 years ago. Some of those 50-year-old action shots, they're hard to distinguish foreground from background. That is very much the case, Jeff. You're absolutely right. The 1973 Topps set in particular, a lot of the action cards are taken from a long distance away, and you see multiple players, and you really have no idea who the featured card is, featured player is. There might be 4 or 5 players on the card. They're seen from a great distance, so they're tiny on the card. You know it's an action shot, but you're not exactly sure who the card is representing. Photography has certainly come a long way. One guy we should mention who's been a great photographer for years is the now retired Doug McWilliams. But I think even Doug would tell you that cameras today enable photographers, professional photographers, to present a clarity to the action shots that was simply not possible back in the early 70s. But even saying that, much of Doug's photography, action, portrait, pose shots, remains iconic to this very day. I think we might have had one more question that we want to go to. Steve Senkner wants to know, is the Ken Hubbs card the first to honor a deceased player? Ken Hubbs died in the early 60s. I'm trying to remember the exact year. It might have been 63. The next year, Topps did put out a card for him. And as I recall, it did say "in memoriam" on the front of the card. That is the first card I recall where Topps ever created that designation or included that designation to honor a player who had passed away. I don't recall that ever being done before. I think they did that a couple of times during the 1960s, but the Hubbs card is the first card that I remember to come out for a player who had passed away. Comes out the following year. He'd been killed in a plane crash the previous winter. And they included the words "in memoriam" on the very front of the card. So that is something that Topps did a few times during the 1960s, and I do believe the first time was for the late Ken Hubbs. Well, some great questions and some great comments. We do hope you enjoyed the program as we look back at the last 50 years of baseball card collecting. I want to mention our next program, which is coming up on Tuesday, September 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to talk to author Jim Buckley. Jim has a new book coming out in conjunction with the Hall of Fame. It's called The Hall of Fame Collection. It's a beautifully photographed coffee table book. And he is going to talk about that book, some of his previous books as well. So Jim Buckley will join us for our next virtual author series. And that is coming up next Tuesday, September 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope you can join us for that. We hope you had a good time with this retrospective, 50 years of collecting baseball cards, 1970 to the current year of 2020. Have a great day, everybody.